In any project that you're doing in graphic design, you really need to think about the grid layout. And the grid layout is a structure. It's kind of like the frame of the piece. It keeps order, it keeps organization. It's really important. We don't just throw things on a page and see where they stick. We really want to think about um, these kind of areas that are within a grid. So you can see from this diagram, there are columns, which are kind of those vertical, the vertical rows. Rows would then be across, those are horizontal. Each of these boxes is a module. You can see the light blue is this margin area. You really want to keep your text away from there. You want to make sure things are lined up within this grid system. And you can go across two grids, like two of these modules, which is what the spatial zone area is. So as long as you stay within that grid area. And this space in here, we would call that the gutter. That's basically kind of your breathing space between. So your next item would start against this on this line here. So you want to leave that gutter space there. So when we think about the grid system, we can think about these different kind of grids, if you will. So there's rule of thirds, which is just like it sounds like. You're splitting your page into three. And I'm going to show you images of these. Golden ratio, single column, two column, multi-column, hierarchical, modular, baseline, and not your typical. So let's take a look at these individually. Rule of thirds. So you divide your paper into thirds both directions, and your area of focus are these intersecting points. So this keeps things more interesting. So your focal point's not always right in the center. Maybe your focal point is more here. It just keeps it more interesting. And there is a debate. Is this a good rule? Is it better to have things in the center? That's really for you to decide. It depends to me what it is. Sometimes I want things in the middle and sometimes I want them off center a little. If you have a face and the face is kind of off to this side, this negative space is actually going to bring the attention to the face itself. So really it just depends on what it is. Okay, so that's rule of thirds. And here are some examples. So showing that your focal point is then kind of on these areas of intersection. And this is like a whole focal point on this side. Same with this one. She's on this line here, more of where that focal point area would be. And here is a major focal point for this one. So this definitely could have been pushed out to be more centered, but this just makes it more interesting because we're seeing a lot more of the scenery than if it was centered. Golden ratio. This is basically splitting that page into that golden ratio. And I don't remember the number right now, but you're constantly just splitting it into, it's basically like a third, but you keep splitting the areas into thirds until you kind of come down to this little space here. So this is another grid, and here's an example. And it's a large open area, some focal point, and some focal point in here. Your eye just kind of moves around. And of course I had to put this one in because I thought that was funny. Okay, and then we have a single column, which is, well, it can be kind of simple and kind of just a very plain, a little more plain. So this is a one column. There's one column on this page, one column on this page. So there's really no variety, still a lot of negative space. So it really works here. This also has one column. It is a, let me just zoom out a little, one image, and this is centered. So also one column. We're going to move to two column, and pretty easy. It's just splitting that page into two. It's an implied line, so there doesn't necessarily have to be a line like this one. It's one column of information and a second column of information. This one ends where this one begins. So a clear two column, and remembering that it can be an implied line, multi-column. This one has 6, but multi could mean many. And it doesn't mean it has to be full columns like this. This is still columns. We don't see the squares, but they are implied. And same with this one. They are here. They just have no fill, no stroke. We don't see them. We only see kind of these sporadic ones, but we can see that this is a clear grid. So if we were to draw a guide or a line here, these are lined up. So that's a clear grid. Hierarchical grid, this one's bigger, meaning this area is going to be what we really see first, second, third, so it gets smaller and smaller. It doesn't have to be large to small. I mean, I could put the biggest one right in the middle, and then I could put the next one up here and then here and here. So you could really put them any way that you want to put them. And here's a good example of that. So this area is very large here, but lots of kind of breakdown. This is large and then it gets smaller as it goes this direction. Modular grid, just that, it's a grid system. So here's some modular grid examples. And then a baseline grid. So this is, you could think of that as like notebook paper. So here are some examples of that baseline grid layout. And it's basically just showing that your baselines are all lined up. So yeah. All right, and then not your typical grid. This is one of my favorites, and these are still pretty lined up, but they don't have to be. I could put a line going this direction and that direction, and they could be any direction you really want. This just gives a little more free-flowing, kind of fun type of thing. And here are some examples. Things going this way, things going this way, but see this N is lined up here, and this line is lined up on that end. So there's still things that feel like they belong together and they're not just thrown there. It's thought out, it's well thought out, and that's what's important. This could also be hierarchical, going this direction with the orange. And you could consider this even a grid. So this could be kind of like that modular kind of grid. Here's another one, not your typical. So things going this way, the names going this way, information going this way. So things kind of move around, and there's clear hierarchy. This is large, this is next in hierarchy, this is third, and this stuff comes last. So you need to think about what order do we want things to be read in. So even if you look at this, this is the largest thing, it's the title. And then we read like the subtitle and then the text. So thinking of hierarchy, it's this, this, and then this. This one, I see these visual elements first, and then the title, these subtitles, this information, and then there's a little line here. So just thinking about, what order do you want things to be seen in? So a few tips to follow. You need to know the goal and the audience. So what is your goal? What needs to be very legible? What needs to be legible from a far distance? Because that makes a difference. So where is it going to be hanging or posted or whatever it might be? And who is your audience? Because that makes a difference for your typeface that you might choose. You need to consider all elements and where they might be positioned best. Design for function. So if it's not legible or you're not getting the idea across, then it really doesn't do you any good. Define space and tone with color, image, and or type. So that's how you're filling those kind of modular areas with those items. Go easy on the reader, so don't make us squint and cock our head to the side because you have tiny text going 90 degrees, or not 90 degrees, but yeah, 90 degrees, straight up and down. Be nice to us, don't kill us. And if your audience is older people, then make sure that, you're thinking about that. Maybe your text is not 10-point type and on its side. Maybe it's 15-point type, and maybe it's at an angle, but more like a 30-degree angle. Communicate using space. So the negative space brings your eye to different elements, so use negative space to your advantage. Mix it up. Don't have everything be the same size. or the same color. You need some contrast that helps to break it up and marry color and type. So really think about the color that's in your images and the color in your type. So what I mean by that is if you look at this image right here, there's typography that goes on the top. And so this one, you're really thinking about space and where you could put the text. Think about the subject matter. So how is it relevant? Make sure it is relevant. Always look for ways that images can frame your words. So here's an example, kind of in that center of the basketball hoop, or like the ornament, putting the text across that center space. Avoid images that compete. So you just want to make sure it's not too busy and that you could really read it. Here's an example of a relationship between the image and the type. So they eyedroppered the color from the shirt, the sleeve, and threw that in the type, and allow images to influence the message. So if we look at this, it's, I don't remember this says, it said something like a little space to something. I don't remember. Let's see, a little space to create. And kind of this backdrop is like, looks like a sheet, maybe it's bed, something like that. So it's not just here that's a place to create, but they're thinking about that background too, and where is it that you have this. Hierarchy, so when we're talking about hierarchy, we're talking about line, shape, color, depth, and hierarchy can be used to guide the viewer from one point until the next point. So you can use any of these things. You can use multiple, a combination of them, really whatever works for you. This hierarchy, this is kind of some example. Hierarchy plus white space equals movement. So if you think about large to small, our eye goes from here to here. So our eye is already going this direction. Also, if you think about negative space, I mean, this contrast of the white, it pulls our eye here and then it brings us out. Also, this negative space on this side brings us down. So then we read flake, and then we read kind of these next in the hierarchy pattern that they've set up for us from largest to smallest. We read, in this direction. And even though there's text here, I'm not reading this first. I'm reading this and then these items, and then I'm going to come back to that because it is the smallest. So that is an overall kind of presentation about grids, and this is something that you should be thinking about with any project that you're doing.